just say this before he starts. If you're over here and you can't see, that'd be a good time to move over there.
Slide a little.
So if you can see, that's fine.
Okay, would you let me know when the first hour is pretty well up?
Okay.
I go up, I get into eternity when I go up here. Seriously, an hour is like 5 minutes. Excuse me? My wife says, how can you talk so much? I said, I don't know. Like, if I'm sitting, I'm not thinking of anything. All of a sudden, I get up here and my head's just full of things about the Lord. But let me open with a word of prayer, and I'm very glad to be here. Father, I thank you for this opportunity to speak about you and about your word and about Bible prophecy and the second coming of Jesus Christ. So, Lord, the Bible says faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. So we ask all the scriptures here would build everyone's faith. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to be speaking about my book tonight, and as Pastor mentioned, here's my book, As America's Done to Israel. It's in 3 parts: history, current events, I call it, and prophecy. And I also have a DVD that goes along with it, America's Fatal Mistake Does Not Have to Be Yours. And I actually have a limited amount. I thought I had brought more with me than I did. But what I have on the table, I think, is all I have. But the book and DVD, I really recommend them together. My publisher, there was bloodletting, Pastor, to get my book to this size. The publisher says, no, you can't. People don't read big books today. They wanted it like this. So I got it out like this, but there was a lot more to put in it, which I couldn't. So I have it here in the DVD. That's why they go together. But yeah, that's what the publisher was telling me. He said, people don't read big books anymore. They don't read much anymore anyways. But I'm really excited to be here. And I was thinking, sitting there, just about God's Word and Bible prophecy. We can take prophecy for granted sometimes. But the Bible is rich with Bible prophecy. And one of the tests of a prophet, you take like Isaiah and Jeremiah, they prophesied things that had to come to pass about their lifetime, that had to come to pass. If it didn't come to pass, then they were viewed as false prophets, and back then you could be killed for being a false prophet. So the prophets were tested in their own lifetimes. And then, so they prophesied things into the immediate time, and then into the future, and then way off into our day, as what the Bible calls the day of the Lord. We're approaching the day of the Lord, and that is the second coming of Jesus Christ. If you look at scriptures, like officially, the Bible starts at the second coming of the Lord, although there is a lead into it. You'll see, like in Obadiah 1:15 here. I'll turn to that shortly. Obadiah 1:15 says, the day of the Lord is near upon all heathen, as thou hast done. And the context is to Israel, it shall be done unto thee, thy reward shall be upon thine own head. That's where I get the name of my book, As America Has Done to Israel. It comes from Obadiah 1:15. So when we look at Bible prophecy, you have the day of the Lord, and then a time period before it, and how much before it, I don't know. Because the Bible doesn't say, but it's called the day of the Lord is near. And I believe that that's the hour that we're in now. We were able to look at these scriptures and say that the day of the Lord is near, because we look out at world events and we put it together with the Bible, and yes, the day of the Lord is near. Just a couple quick things to show you what I mean. We take a look at the Ukraine and Russia there going at it, and NATO may get involved, we may get involved, and you go, well, how is the Ukraine tied up with the Bible, and what is it related to do with us? When we look at Ezekiel 38 and 39, there are countries mentioned there in that chapter about the great battle that's going to take place. And Magog is the Ukraine, that area north of the Black Sea, right there, the Crimea, that whole area, that is Magog in the Bible. So, and when I wrote my book, and that'll be in the third part, I go into prophecy. Russia was down and out. It was kind of economically beaten and every way beaten. And this is about 15 years ago or so now, I said that Russia was coming back, that Russia was going to be a great power. Russia was going to be the major European power. I based that on Ezekiel 38, 39, and sure enough, now we have Magog rising, and that's going to be Russia. That's the Ukraine, one way or another, is going to come under Russian control to fulfill Bible prophecy. So that's happening right in front of us. And then we look out there, and China is building a mighty army. It came from no place 15 years ago, 20 years ago, to right now. And as I study this, because I study it every day, I think it's virtually impossible for the United States to defend Japan and Taiwan there without nuclear weapons. That China has become so powerful that it is impossible. And that is getting ready for Revelation 9 and 16 about the kings of the East coming with a 200 million man army to Armageddon. And then in the book I write about the coming, and the DVD, the coming of an Islamic caliphate. Do you know what a caliphate is? Want me to explain it? I'll explain it. A caliphate, the Arab nations are basically tribes. And what we see today, Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia, they never existed in history. They were just created some after World War I, like Iraq, and some after World War II, like Jordan and Israel and Lebanon. So throughout history, you had the tribes from really Morocco on the Atlantic Ocean all the ways over to Iraq and the Euphrates River. That makes up the Arab nations. And when a ruler would become powerful, he would expand his control, and he would form what was called a caliphate, a pan-Islamic union. Like you could say, look at the United States with the 50 states, and we have a federal government. So you got 50 individual states merged with a federal government. That's what a caliphate is. You get all the Arab tribes merged under one powerful head. And I said that a caliphate is coming, because we look at Psalm 83, and we look at other scriptures in there. The Bible talks about a confederation coming. In our modern terms, we call it a caliphate. And that's what we see now, ISIS. ISIS is that Islamic caliphate. ISIS is Muhammad. All this nonsense about Islam being peaceful and all that's pure nonsense. It's propaganda to get accepted here. Islam is not peaceful. The only time you could possibly view Islam as peaceful is when they subdued everybody and they crushed them. And we can look at Saudi Arabia today. If you convert to the Lord in Saudi Arabia, it's very simple. They'll kill you, just like ISIS does. Only they do it more clinical, behind the scenes. But it's the death penalty for conversion or attempting to convert someone. This comes right out of Sharia law. It comes right out of Muhammad's teachings. Muhammad led, I don't want to get too far into this, but what ISIS is doing basically is fundamental Islam promoted by Muhammad. And I don't know if that sounds strange to you or tough words, but that's what it is.
That's right.
And the ironic thing about Islam and the Muslims, well, let me stop before I say that. There is nothing that I believe that I'm ashamed of. Nothing. There is nothing that I hide. It's all out front. I'm not ashamed of anything the Lord said, anything He did at all. But with Islam, if you tell the truth, they try and suppress it and say that you're an Islamophobe, that you are you're full of hatred, when you're simply telling the truth about their prophet, the Quran, and the Hadiths, the secondary books. So what you see ISIS doing is really what Muhammad started and the following leaders fulfilled. And I believe that this is unstoppable now. This is unstoppable. And you're going to see that whole area fall to the Islamic Caliphate, whether it's ISIS or some other form of it. You watch the factions start to merge, and the more power, the more success that ISIS has, the more we're going to join it, and it's going to become bigger and more powerful. And the Bible writes about this in Psalm 83, for example. And there are other scriptures which I may go into tonight in the third part. So what we're seeing is the formation of the caliphate that is coming to pass when the day of the Lord is near. See? So we're seeing these huge signs, and the state of Israel in existence. There's the major one. Israel had been out of existence as a nation for approximately 1,900 years. And before that, 2,600 years ago, they were taken captive by the Babylonians and brought into Babylon. And usually back then, at that time, what they did was when they conquered a people, they killed virtually everyone, and they would keep like engineers, architects, people of great knowledge, artisans, painters, and things like that. They basically kill off everybody else, and they would absorb those people into their culture, and that would be the end of that culture. But the Jews have a covenant with the Lord. And Jeremiah wrote about the captivity, that they were going to come back. So they came back. And then the Lord and the prophets warned in scriptures, the apostles, about the second dispersion, right? They warned. The Lord clearly warned in Matthew 24 and Luke 21 and other scriptures. And they were dispersed, but the Lord said they're going to come back. And they did come back in our lifetime. There's people here that remember it. May 21st, 1948. Who remembers that? Anyone? No, May 14th, 1948. Anybody remember that? All right. No one wants to admit it, huh? You do. Okay, we have one. In fact, two very important things happened in May 1948. May 14th was the rebirth of the nation of Israel, right? Right. Yeah, in one day, that the scripture said. But something very else important happened in May 1948, and I wish it had got more recognition, or not more than Israel, but more recognition. Does anybody want to take a guess?
Your birthday?
Who said that? You heard me say that someplace? All right. I look old. Oh, man. Yes, that's my birthday. I just had 2 wisdom teeth taken out. The upper one and the lower one here. So the oral surgeon said, look, with your age, and he goes, there's a couple other factors. He said, this tooth is going to take a lot of work to get out. You're going to have to go to the hospital. He said, I recommend that. And I said, yeah, I'd rather go to the hospital. So I went down in Harrisburg to the orthopedic hospital, and I'm sitting in there just before the operation with my wife, and one of the operating nurses comes out, and she said, oh, Mr. McTernan, I just wanted to meet you because I work on a lot of oral surgery, and you're the oldest impacted wisdom tooth patient I've ever seen. I went, oh, that's nice. And then another one comes out. The whole team came out to meet me. I'm like making medical history. So then the anesthesiologist comes out, and he's looking at the chart, and he's asking me some questions, and he goes, is this a mistake? He goes, how old are you? I said, 66. Well, first of all, he paid me a compliment. He said, you don't look 66. I said, well, that's nice. He said, but you know, I think you're I do a lot of the anesthesia for the oral surgeons. And he goes, I don't remember a patient your age getting wisdom teeth coming out. So then the doctor comes, and he's a believer, by the way, a Jewish believer in the Lord, Dr. Myers. And I said, doctor, your operating staff came out, and they said that they wanted to meet me because I was the oldest wisdom-impacted tooth patient they've ever seen. So he went like this. He goes, no, I've had over 40,000 procedures, and yeah. So I told my wife, I said, I didn't feel old coming in, but I really feel old. So you threw gasoline on the fire. But anyways, yes, I kid with that. I was born May 21st, 1948, and Israel became a nation May 21st, 1940. So May 14th. So when you look at me, I look real old, and you can say, well, modern Israel is real old. Okay, let's get started here. Now, what I want to talk about is American history. Now, this is from Genesis 12:3. I will bless them that bless thee, and curse them that curseth thee. And then thee shall all the families of the earth be blessed. So this is a blessing here that's put upon Abraham and his descendants as we go through scriptures. Now, I'm not going to go through all of the descendants, but we'll just stay with that. And here is Obadiah 1:15, which is now, this is what I said, I quoted earlier. For the day of the Lord, now look at this, is near. See that? Upon all the heathen. Prior in Obadiah, it was about Edom. And the Lord had just used Edom as an example. I think I'm going to get into that in the third part. He used Edom in the first 14 verses as an example. Then verse 15 says, for the day of the Lord is near upon all heathen, as thou hast done to Israel, it shall be done unto thee. Thy reward shall be upon thine own head. So the call of Abraham, the blessings start. And when you look here at Obadiah, Obadiah is prophesying about our time. Obadiah is only 21 verses. And hardly anyone preaches on it and teaches on it. And if you read commentaries, which I don't recommend, but the commentaries say basically it was all fulfilled in 600 BC with the Babylonian captivity, and it has moral messages for today, but no literal message. Well, the day of the Lord hasn't come, right? It has a message for today.
Sure.
The day of the Lord is near. So what happens is the day of the Lord is the second coming of Jesus Christ. So from the call of Abraham all the way to the second coming of Jesus Christ is a blessing or a curse how people and nations handle the Jewish people. Now, I want to come into American history, and I think there's a part of this that's very important, what I'm leading to as I get into this. But it's really important that we understand American history as Americans, because our heritage has been robbed, literally. It's been stripped away and robbed. The secular world, they want to get away from the Christian heritage as far as possible. And the church doesn't seem to really care, I guess. And we're left with whole generations growing up really not knowing how the Lord used us as a nation. And you're going to see how the United States was directly involved with God's prophetic plan for the end times, for the creation of the nation of Israel. So George Washington, he was, of course we all know about George Washington, but he was a great lover of the Jewish people, as were almost all the founding fathers, all of them. And the Jews in America at the time of the American Revolution was about 3,000. And they were sent to, the big one, I think it was Philadelphia, New York, Newport, Rhode Island, Savannah, Georgia, and there was some others, there were 7 that escaped my mind, centers where the Jews congregated. And to a man, to a person, they joined the American Revolution and helped in every way possible. And in financial areas, they were very important of the American Revolution. George Washington's aide-de-camp, Colonel Bush, by the way was his name, he was a Jew, and his personal physician at Valley Forge was a Jewish man. So George Washington, and as I said, many of the founding fathers were very, let's put it this way, it was not an impediment virtually at any time in America except the 1920s, well, probably the 1930s, to be Jewish. Unique in history. The American Jews were the envy of Jews throughout the world. That's how blessed they were here in America. So George Washington, after the Revolution, this is in 1790, and after he was elected president, he went on speaking tours around the country, and he sent letters to, congregational heads sent letters to him congratulating him on being elected, and he returned the letters. And this here was his letter to the Hebrews, and they were not really called Jews back there. As I studied history, they were called the Hebrews, and they called them the stock of Abraham. Very, very seldom. Today we call them Jews, but very seldom back then when they called Jews, they were called Hebrews, or George Washington referred to them as the stock of Abraham. But this is what he wrote in response to the letter he received from the Hebrew congregation in Savannah, Georgia. May the same wonder-working be, who long since delivered the Hebrews from their Egyptian oppressors, planted them in a promised land, now look at this, whose providential agency has lately been conspicuous in establishing these United States as an independent nation. So he is linking the creation of delivering the Jews from Egypt with the same God who created the United States. Still continue to water them with the dews of heaven and make the inhabitants of every denomination participate in the temporal and spiritual blessings of that people whose God is Jehovah. George Washington was quoting Psalm 144, verse 15. Happy is that people that in such case, yea, happy is that people whose God is the Lord, whose God is Jehovah. I'm a historian by nature, and if you study the American Revolution, we could not have won it without the weather. The weather was an outright tool. I heard true. Has anybody here studied that by any chance? Yeah. I just want to give you one example. And George Washington, when he said this about being conspicuous in establishing the United States as an independent nation, as one of the things he was making reference to, because constantly, in battle after battle, the weather was in our favor, either to win or to protect the army from being completely demolished by the British. We lived to fight another day. I'll give you one quick example. George Washington had the American, actually it was the first battle of the war, called the Battle of Long Island, and the British landed many more troops than he thought, and the army was cut off. And the next day, the British Navy had surrounded on one side, and the British Army on the other. The American Army was right in between, and it would have been annihilated in the first battle. There would have been no Valley Forge or anything else. And there were professional seamen that were rowers. They didn't have motorboats. They would row. And there was numbers of them there because they had brought troops over from like New England. And a heavy pea soup fog came in, settled in. And they put rags on the oars, and they would row the troops right literally under the nose of the British Navy to the other side. All night long, they ferried the troops back. And when daybreak came, there still was like a third of his army there. There wasn't enough time to get them out. And the fog lifted everywhere but where they were. And the British couldn't advance because there was this big, thick fog where you couldn't see like this. The British Navy was in the river off, and they couldn't see anything. And they ferried the entire army, the rest of the morning, out from the British Navy and out from the British Army, across the. Now this is in history. You can read this. This when it comes to history. And when the fog lifted, the British were astonished. George Washington and his army was gone. Every one of them gone. So the fog lasted just long enough for the entire American army to escape being annihilated by the British army. And that's what George Washington is talking about. That's only one example. There's dozens. There's books written on that, about the weather favoring the Americans during the American Revolution. So there were days, when you read in history, there were days of prayers and fastings. There were days, Congress would call a day of proclamation of thanking the Lord. And they would thank the Lord. One of the things they would thank for was the weather and delivering the army during this battle, where it would have been destroyed except for this heavy fog that came in. So George Washington and our founding fathers recognized that they could not have won the war without the Lord controlling the weather. Amen? Amen. You read that in history? If you search, you can find it, but that's not taught. Now this is another book, another letter that George Washington wrote, and this is to the Hebrews in Rhode Island, Newport, Rhode Island. May the children of the stock of Abraham, who dwell in this land continue to merit and enjoy the goodwill of other inhabitants, while everyone shall sit under his own vine and fig tree, and there shall none to make him afraid. Now he's quoting from Micah chapter 4. May the fathers of all mercies scatter light and not darkness in our paths, and make us all in our own several vocations useful here, and all in his own due time and way exceedingly happy. Micah 4:3. And he shall judge among the people, and shall rebuke strong nations afar off, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. And they shall sit every man under his vine and under his fig tree, and none shall make them afraid. The mouth of the Lord of hosts has spoken. These are messianic scriptures. These are scriptures about the second coming of the Lord and setting up the messianic reign. And George Washington told the Jews, we want you to live here and be so blessed, it's like under the messianic reign. Isn't that amazing?
Amen.
That's the foundation of America. And I believe there's two reasons why we were blessed as a nation. And one is the gospel was honored and promoted and exalted here. The real gospel, like no other nation. And the second is that we honored the Jewish people. We honored the covenant that God made with them. And that's why we're blessed. We're not blessed because, I don't know, superior intelligence or whatever you want to look at it. Because if that's the case, we wouldn't be blessed, right? But we receive the blessings of heaven because of what our founding fathers did. Amen?
Amen.
Okay, here's Chaim Solomon. He's a Jewish man from Poland. He escaped Poland after the war with Russia in 1770. He came to the United States. He came to New York, and he was fiercely independent or loved freedom. And he joined the Sons of the Revolution. And he spoke like 6 languages. And he knew financing. So when the war broke out, he stayed in New York, and he became a spy for George Washington because he understood German. And there were a lot of German mercenaries. So he would hear what was being said in German, and he would report it. He was captured as a spy, and the first time they let him go. He was captured the second time. He escaped. History doesn't record. All of a sudden, he mysteriously gets out of New York and he's in Philadelphia. But he contracted today, I guess, what we would call TB in captivity when he was captured. And eventually, he died from it. He was young. He was only like about 45. But in Boston, in Philadelphia, he was very honest, and he had he could exchange money like today. We have certain money is worth so much compared to our money. Well, he knew those rates. He spoke the languages, and he was very honest. So all of a sudden, he had this gigantic clearinghouse business. He became very wealthy. And right towards the end of the revolution, from basically October of 1781 to we became a country in 1783, his personal wealth and credit kept America afloat. No one would give us any credit, no nation, but they gave us credit based on him. And there were, I don't exactly remember who the Americans were. I think Madison may have been one, but there were leading Americans that had lost everything, and he gave them loans and kept them afloat. So he's very instrumental. And in fact, when the Bank of the United States came out in 1783, I believe it was, no one would put money in because the bank wasn't backed by anything. So you could put money in the bank one day, and Friday it could collapse and you could lose everything. So he put all his money in the bank. The first money in the Bank of the United States was Chaim Solomon's money. And he went to the Jews in Philadelphia, and he said, put your money in, and they wouldn't do it. He said, put your money in. He goes, we got to get wealth into the bank to establish us as a nation. He said, this is a good nation. The Jews are going to be blessed here. put your money in it. So they did. He convinced the Philadelphia Jews to put their money in it. So the very first money in the Bank of the United States was Jewish money, promoted by Chaim Solomon and the people around him. Isn't that amazing? You see how integrated, like from the very beginning, we are? And I'm only giving you a little fraction. There's a lot more in my book. Now, this is, we're all familiar with the Battle of New Orleans, or Andy Jackson in the Battle of New Orleans. All right, and here's Andy Jackson right there. And if you look, let me see. I can't see it from my hand. See up close, it's blurry. Oh, right here. You see right here, there's cannons. Can everybody see that? And there's colorful people right here. Okay. What happened was, at the Battle of New Orleans, it was a complete ragtag army. We virtually had no professional soldiers there. We had about 3,000 militia from Tennessee and Kentucky and Alabama. And the rest were Creole Indians, some free blacks were there, a bunch of others, all thrown together under the leadership of Andy Jackson. But what happened was there were pirates, and these are the pirates. The artillery was manned by pirates in there. Now, the pirate was Jean Lafitte, actually it was the Lafitte brothers. And this pirate, this should get more attention and publicity. Truth is stranger than fiction. They're called the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean. They were Jews. Right. The Lafitte brothers were French Jews. They were born in France. They decided to go to the Caribbean, and they took up pirating. They were the big entrepreneurs. They had warehouses full of goods. If you needed anything, you had to go through the Lafitte brothers. They're called the Jewish Pirates of the Caribbean. That's the title for them. And the governor of Louisiana was so upset with Jean Lafitte that he put a $500 bounty on his head, dead or alive. And Jean Lafitte put a $5,000 bounty on the governor's head. So they took a lot of arm twisting. Isn't this interesting in American history? The Jewish pirates of the Caribbean teamed up with Andy Jackson. So, and finally, Jackson accepted the pirates into his army because they were granted a pardon by the American government. And Lafitte told Jackson, he said, the British Army is coming this way. He said, you defend today what we call, it skips my mind right now. See, I'm going to be thinking the rest of the day. But what happens is, there's a narrow section of land between the Mississippi River and an impenetrable swamp. And there was a sunken, canal, I think it's called Rodriguez Canal. He said, you defend that, the British Navy will get bottlenecked. Now the British Army will get bottlenecked, and it'll even the fight. So Jackson did. And Jackson put his the artillery there. So Lafitte and the Jewish pirates, they took their cannons off the ships and they put them in place. So it was the British Navy which dismounted their cannons against the Jewish pirates, the American Army. And the Jewish pirates won. And we won the Battle of New Orleans. So, I mean, I just love that. There he is, right there. That's the Jewish pirates of the Caribbean with Andy Jackson. The Lafitte brothers. Oh, there he is, right there. There's Jean Lafitte. It's a little story about him right there in the Battle of New Orleans. This man is really interesting. Uriah Levy, Commodore Uriah Levy. He was the Commodore of the Mediterranean Fleet. He was from Philadelphia, a Jewish man from Philadelphia. And right here in his hands, right there, is a parchment. And all his life in the Navy, he was a career naval officer. He wanted to end flogging. We picked that up from the British, and you got flogged for anything. anything. And he thought it was barbaric and counterproductive. So he had tried and tried and tried for years to have a law passed to outlaw flogging in the Navy. And finally, in 1851, Congress outlawed flogging. And here, right in his hand, this portrait of him, right in his hand, that is the law outlawing flogging. So, anybody here in the Navy? Okay. If you are, you could thank that Jew that didn't get flogged. And there was a destroyer named after him in World War II, and also the naval, the chapel, the Jewish chapel in Annapolis. I don't know if it still is, but it was named the Commodore Uriah Levy Chapel. There's much more. I'm just kind of skimming through it. Abraham Lincoln, let me see what I got about Lincoln. Yeah, Abraham Lincoln was very, there were Jews in his political campaign. The Jewish people were very close to him. There was no law, there was, Jewish chaplains were forbidden in the U.S. Army. I don't know why, but they were. And a Jew brought this to Abraham Lincoln's attention. He petitioned Congress, and a special law was passed allowing, during the Civil War, allowing Jewish chaplains in the American Army. Usually in countries, they make laws specifically against Jews to forbid them from various things. In America, we made a law, especially to include them, you know, like this, being chaplains. And then General Order 11 was issued on December 17th, 1862, and this is it. The Jews as a class violating every regulation of trade established by the Treasury Department and also department orders are hereby expelled from the department within 24 hours from the receipt of this order. It's called General Grant issued this, and there's a big debate in history, and I think what's the consensus is he rubber stamped it. And there were some unethical traders that were trading gunpowder and ammunition to the South for cotton and tobacco. And several of them were caught, and two were Jewish. And this order was issued against those, against all the Jews because of what two traders. Well, I don't mean trade, trade, T-R-A-D-E, not traitor as against your country. And anyways, that was issued on December 17th, 1862. And on January 6th, Lincoln found out about it. A congressman from Ohio came to him and told him about this order that Grant had issued. And Lincoln was incensed over it. And he called in his top general, General Halleck, and said, this is what he said: a paper purporting to be General Orders number 11, issued by you on December 17th, has been presented here. By its terms, it expels all Jews from the department. If such an order has been issued, it will be immediately revoked. So this is Abraham Lincoln's order to General Grant, right there. So it was revoked, and Lincoln would not stand for it. So, and that's behind the scenes stuff. But the Jews never held it against Grant, because he became president, and they heavily voted for him. The Jewish Chronicles, this is 1862. It's a newspaper in London. It's the most influential Jewish newspaper in the world. And it talks about the Jews in America were free. Jews were found in all positions of life, filling offices from the highest to the lowest. And although their happy condition was known in Europe and throughout, oppressed weighed heavily upon them in the old world, yet so few were the facilities for traveling, and so accustomed had the grown-up generations been to persecution, that few sought asylum in the land of freedom beyond the ocean. Isn't that amazing? That's what they called the Jews throughout the world. They called America the land of freedom, European Jews beyond the ocean. But it's what they said was America was too rugged of a life, and it was too hard to get there, and we've kind of grown accustomed to persecution in Europe, so we're going to stay here. How much time is left?
Half hour.
Now, there are certain things in history that are extremely important. Now, most of us have never heard of Tsar Alexander II of Russia. He was assassinated on March 13, 1881. Here he is right here. And he was assassinated, by the way, by Lenin. Part of the assassination team was Vladimir Lenin's brother, you know, the founder of communistic Russia. And I don't know why, and I've read this in history, and I've tried to find out, but with this assassination, a pogrom broke out in Russia. Now, pogrom, if you're not familiar with the word, is an organized attack on a certain people. It's either organized by the government or it's organized by like a religious group. So here, the Russian church was behind this, and they immediately, all throughout Russia, they went after the Jews and brutalized the Jews because of this assassination. And I had never, the Jews weren't involved in it. So I have no idea why this thing broke out, but it broke out on March 13, 1881. So the assassination of this man has sent a rippling effect through history that affects us right to today. Because of the pogrom that broke out, the Jews said, we don't want to live in Russia anymore. Huge numbers of them. So huge numbers got up and they left and they came to America. And a small number, a very small number, trickled south into what then was known as Palestine. And that started the Jewish, the rebirth of the modern state of Israel. It starts right here with the assassination of this man and the huge Jewish migration to the United States. Millions, probably 1.5 million to 2 million came, and it starts the Zionist movement. A small trickle comes down back to Israel and starts today what we know the Zionist movement and the modern state of Israel. Isn't that amazing? That one event, it's lost in history, but from a prophecy point of view, this is critical right here. All right, so what happens is, this is William E. Blackstone. He's an American evangelist in the 1880s and 90s into the early 20th century. And there was a revival going on in America after the Civil War. And it was a smoldering revival. It wasn't like, what would we call it? Big, huge numbers. It was slow and steady coming to the Lord. And it was a revival, really part of it, well, the huge part of it was into Bible prophecy and the literalness of Scripture and the literalness of the rebirth of the nation of Israel and the coming of the Lord for the church. Whole seminaries were created and churches were just growing. It was it was all over the country this year. And the man that kind of headed it was William Blackstone. And in the middle of this revival that's taking place about Bible prophecy, about the rebirth of the nation of Israel, hundreds of thousands and eventually millions of Jews are pouring in from Russia into the United States. And the church rose to the occasion, by the way. 120 years ago, 130 years ago, they helped the Jews because they were destitute coming from Russia. And they helped them medically, with shelter. Some Jewish organizations that today still exist for preaching the gospel grew out of this. And when they looked at the scriptures, the church leaders back then, when they looked at the scriptures and they looked at what was happening to the Jews, they said, now is the time for the creation of the state of Israel. Now is the time. And this man here headed this up. And in history, it refers to it as the Blackstone Memorial. And on March 5th, 1891, he presented the document to the President of the United States, William Harrison at the time, and the Secretary of State, James Blaine. And in it, basically, it was the foundation for the modern state of Israel. The whole church in America, well, I won't say the whole church, but huge numbers of believers in America were crying out to the Lord. They were having prayer meetings, fasting meetings for the restoration of the state, well, we call it now the state of Israel, but the restoration of the Jews back in the homeland, which is called Palestine. America was on fire with this. And the man that headed up there was Blackstone. So I want to give you a couple quotes from it. There seems to be many evidences to show that we have reached a point in the great roll of the centuries when the ever-living God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is lifting up his hand to the Gentiles to bring his sons and daughters from afar, that they may plant them again in their own land. Not for 24 centuries, since the days of Cyrus, king of Persia, has there been offered to any mortal such a privileged opportunity for the to further the purposes of God concerning his ancient people. Now, and that's just a little bit of it. That's just a tiny bit of the Blackstone Memorial. But look at the signatures to this. Mayor of Chicago, Mayor of Baltimore, Mayor of Philadelphia, Mayor of New York, Mayor of Boston, Governor of Massachusetts, the editor of the New York Times, Chief Justice of the United States, Speaker of the House, Chairman of the House Committee on Foreign Affairs, William McKinley, future president, several other congressmen, president of the Security and Stock Exchange Commission, president of Cyrus McCormick. Okay. So what you had was America was like on fire with this revival, and it spilled over to politics. And the whole country was behind the creation of the modern state of Israel. And what happened was, it was what the Russians had done to the Jews. America opened its arms and let the Jews come in. And the church saw this, and they rose to the occasion to help them coming in. And then they said, look, here are the scriptures, and look what's happening to the Jews. It's time that they have their homeland. So they petitioned the President of the United States. Now, the President didn't do anything other than he mentioned it in his State of the Union message. So what happened was, you notice that date there, 1891? In 1898, we had the official beginning of the Zionist movement with an incident that happened in Europe, in France. And Louis Brandeis was the Chief Justice of the United States. And in 1916, in Philadelphia, there was a Federation of American Zionist men, and they invited Blackstone to speak, an American evangelist. They invited him to this Congress in 1916. And what it was is, just to sum this up, the Jewish Zionists, the early Jewish Zionists, said that the father of modern Zionism was not Theodore Herzl, the Jew, but that it was William Blackstone, the American evangelist, and that only Herzl borrowed from Blackstone's ideas. Now, America, the early Zionists said that the foundation of Zionism came from the church in America. Isn't that amazing?
Wow.
We should be like on the rooftops, like, Lord, you've used us as a people, and yet we don't know it. I bring that out in my book. There's, again, more than what I'm saying. But the Lord used us. We honored the Lord. We honored his word, and he used us as a people to begin the process to where we are now in prophecy. It starts here in America, in the church, in the 1880s and 1890s. President Woodrow Wilson, let me see what I have there for you. Okay. Well, it's just about 100 years ago. Right now, about 100 years ago, World War I had broken out, and the Ottoman Turks used that as a cloak to destroy the Armenian Christians. And there was, we don't know for sure, but there's an estimate of 1.5 million to 2 million Armenian Christians. Now, a lot of these are real believers in the Lord, like anywhere, you know. With us Christians, there's some that believe and some that just go through the motions. But about 1900, about 15 years before this, a young guy, probably a teenager, he went around Armenia telling the people that great judgment was coming, great disaster was coming, to flee Armenia and go to America, and specifically California. And he didn't even know he probably couldn't point America out on a map. But the Lord had woke him up, gave him dreams, he had like visions. He went all around Armenia. And the Armenian population in America today basically comes from this young boy's vision and warning, and the people took up his warning and left and came here. The ones that stayed were all killed, virtually to the last one. The Armenian Turks, they made the Nazis blush, what they did to the Christians. They were just like ISIS, exactly like ISIS is doing now. This is what happened 100 years ago. The Americans were incensed here. Wilson was incensed. There was nothing he could do. Armenia was way tucked in Turkey, and we couldn't really send our army there. There was nothing that could be done. So when the Turks finished with the Christians, they were going against the Jews, and the Jews were in Palestine by now. It was about, from that Russian exodus, there was probably about 50,000 of them, maybe 70,000. They were starting to kill, they were starting to identify the Jews to kill them, like they had done with the Armenian Christians. Now our fleet could get there. Armenia was way inland, but our fleet could get there. Wilson was very, President Wilson loved the Jewish people. And he told the Turks, if you hurt the Jews, we're going to declare war on you. And the Turks didn't want to go to war with us because they were already at war with the British and the French. So they worked a deal out where we could remove the Jews from Palestine and take them we took them to Egypt, where they were under the control of Britain and they could be protected. So this here is the USS Tennessee. And when I speak in Tennessee, I kid the people, because I'll tell them, you got to hear my message, how Tennessee saved the Jews. I neglect to say the USS Tennessee. So it's a way of drawing them in. So right here is the USS Tennessee. It was a heavy cruiser, and it was sent to Haifa, I believe it was Haifa, to ferry the Jews. And here is an actual picture, and I'm a little blessed by this because this is original. I found this in the Captain Decker's memoirs in Stanford University. They had never been released before. And this is the USS Tennessee, and these are the Jews coming on board, being ferried out of Palestine to be protected. So God used the U.S. Navy, and there would be no Israel as we know it today, because the Turks would have killed them all, just like they did the Armenian Christians. So God used the United States Navy to protect his fledgling, I call it the zygote, nation of Israel in 1915, 1916. Isn't that neat?
Yeah.
Here's some more pictures of the Jews boarding the USS Tennessee. Yeah, that's where it's titled, Refugees, US Tennessee. You can see the sailors, and then these are like all the Jews. So the Tennessee would take, I don't know how many they could get on, and they would take them over to Alexandria, Egypt, and come back and load more, and come back and load more, until they took thousands and thousands and thousands. Okay. Now this year, we're getting real serious now. This is President Roosevelt. This is King Saud of Saudi Arabia, and this is an American general. Here, Roosevelt is coming back in, this is February of 1945. He met with Stalin at what's called the Yalta Conference, how they were going to divide up Europe after World War II. And on the way back, he stopped in Alexandria, Egypt, to meet with King Saud. And Roosevelt agreed that, or the king saw and agreed that the United States would have a special role in the Middle East oil, and that the United States would protect Saudi Arabia. And then if you read it in history, there's a little footnote, and it said President Roosevelt also, the king persuaded President Roosevelt to drop his idea of a Jewish state in Palestine. So when you read it between the lines, the king saw it, said, if you want the special deal with the oil, no Jewish state in Palestine. Roosevelt agreed to it. The king sent him a letter in March of 1945 saying, I've heard rumors that you were negating on our deal about a Jewish state in Palestine. And this is Roosevelt's response. There's the letter, March 10th. He's responding to this April 5th. I received the communication which Your Majesty sent me March 10th, in which you referred to the question of Palestine and the continuing interest of the Arabs in current developments affecting that country. It all had to do about the Jews. That's what it was about. I am gratified that Your Majesty took this occasion to bring this to you. Oh, and the memorial conversation we had on February 14th, 1945. That's that meeting where you saw Roosevelt with the king. I had the opportunity to obtain so vivid an impression of Your Majesty's sentiments on this question. Again, it's all kind of coded about the creation of the nation of Israel. Your Majesty will recall on that previous occasion, I communicated to you the attitude of the American government towards Palestine and made it clear that no decision will be taken in respect to the basic situation in that country without the full consent of both Arabs and Jews. Well, the Arabs would never consent to it. So Roosevelt is saying, without your consent, America won't agree to the creation of the State of Israel. This whole thing is about the creation of the State of Israel. I assure you that I would take no action in my capacity as chief of the executive branch of this government, which might prove hostile to the Arab people. It gives me pleasure to renew to Your Majesty the assurances which I gave you previously received regarding the attitude of my government, and now look at this, my own as chief executive. So not only is he saying it's the United States government, but Roosevelt's saying this is my opinion also. With regard to the question of Palestine, and to inform you that the policy of this government in this respect is unchanged. President wrote, and then that was dated April 5th, 1945. On April 12th, Roosevelt died. 7 days. 7 days after he said, I'm taking it upon myself that there will be no Palestinian state, Jewish state in Palestine. Now, I didn't have time here. I just want to surmise the letter that was dated March 10th. It is unbelievable. It was like Hermann Göring, the Nazi minister of propaganda, wrote it against Israel. It was against the Jews. It was just a scathing letter calling the Jews like cursed and the scum of the earth, and they want to start wars and kill all the Arab people, and I mean it went on and on and on. And they're fascists. They're just like creating Nazis. You fought the Nazis in Europe, and now you want to create a Nazi state. The Jews want to create a Nazi state in Israel, and that's Roosevelt's glowing response to this king, was knowing full well what the king said and had in that letter. 1 week later, Roosevelt was dead. 7 days later, after he said in writing, I'm taking it upon myself, this is my position, there will be no Jewish state in Palestine. Who replaced him but Harry Truman? Harry Truman was one of the world's, as far as non-Jews, Gentiles go, leading Zionists. Isn't that amazing? God removed the one and then put in the other. Now, Harry Truman had a Baptist background, and when you read about him, I don't know too much about his mother, but his grandmother was really strong in the Lord, and from Harry Truman was that big. His grandmother used to read the Bible to him, teach him the Bible, and tell him, Harry, you always bless the Jews. God still has the covenant. You always bless the Jews. So from when he's a little kid, growing up with his grandmother, He's got this instilled in him. So God removes a man that says, I'll never agree, the American government will never agree, and replaces sort of an obscure senator who became vice president from Missouri to put him in place, and he is the man that put the United States behind the creation of the state of Israel. You see God's hand in all this? 1 week. 1 week.
About 5 minutes.
What's that?
About 5 minutes.
Okay. Now here is the actual letter that it doesn't look like much. It doesn't look that official. Let me see if I have. But this is the letter dated May 14th, 1948. Now, what happened on May 21st, 1948? Come on. All right. Okay. I'm linked together with that. You see that? But here's the letter. It doesn't look that official, does it? I mean, it's got scribbling on it and all. And Harry Truman was informed at 6 p.m. that the state of Israel had been born. And on 6/11, it took him 11 minutes to recognize it. And it says, this government has been informed that the Jewish state has been proclaimed in Palestine, and that recognition has been requested by the provincial government thereof. The United States recognizes the provincial government as the de facto authority of the state of Israel. The baby's born now. The strongest nation on earth is behind it, and it's launched into the prophetic word now through the prophetic that we see today. All right, I won't go into that. Now here, this is interesting. This is this is a statue in Jerusalem to Colonel Mickey Marcos, and Mickey Marcos is a very interesting man. He's a brilliant Jewish man that had been a lawyer in the United States prior to the war, and he had been in special prosecutor. He was a notable attorney before the war. When the war broke out, he joined, and he was made, he is the one that arranged special forces. You know, there's special forces today? He started that. He was the man in charge of creating special forces back in like 1942. After the war, he was the man that set up the Nuremberg trials, set up all the procedures, set the judges, the attorneys that were involved. When you see the whole structure of the Nuremberg trials, it was Mickey Marcos who did it. And when it was evident that Israel was going to become a nation, like in late 1947, and that the Arabs are going to attack the moment Israel became a nation, the Jewish state needed a general. So they approached Mickey Marcos about becoming a general, and a general of the army, of the Israeli army. And so what happened was he went to, this is unique in history, he went to his commanding officers. In fact, he was in the reserves now, and they said, look, you can't be an American officer to command a foreign army like that. You're going to have to resign your position in the reserves, and we're asking you to go over under an assumed name, which he did. But his real name was Mickey Marcos. So when he went to Israel, he had the American battle doctrine memorized, because he wrote it when it came to special forces. So he wrote the Israeli battle doctrine, and when you hear that the Israeli army was ragtag and it fought this British-trained Arab army, I mean, that's true to a sense, but the Israelis fought under American special forces battle doctrine initiated by Mickey Marcos. Isn't that amazing? So God raised up an American general who was the exact man that was needed so the Israelis could fight sort of an organized army by like special forces. And he was given the title Aluf, which in Hebrew means like top general. Like if you know anything about the Maccabees, Judas Maccabee was the last Aluf of Israel. David would have been Aluf as he commanded the generals. So The last aloof in Israel had been during the Maccabean uprising. That was like 150 BC. The next one is an American general, General Mickey Marcos. So God raised up, not only did he raise up Truman to politically solidify the rebirth of the nation of Israel, but he raised up an American general, Mickey Marcos, to lead the Israeli army, in which the only way they could fight was like through special forces. He led them, and they won. Now the sad thing is, this monument to him is the spot where he was killed. It was the day before the armistice, or the night before, in 1949, and he went out to reconnoiter the area. He wanted to see if perhaps the Arabs had been attacked and not follow the armistice. And he was out there kind of for a long time. When he came back, there was a changing of the guard, and the guard only spoke Hebrew, didn't speak English, and there was a breakdown, and Mickey Marcos apparently didn't stop, and the guard shot and killed him. So that's the memorial to him in Jerusalem. And he's the only American buried in West Point that was killed during a foreign war, because he was leading the Israeli army against the Arab armies. And with that, we'll take a break, and we're going to pick up with everything was sort of great with America until October 3rd, with Israel and the God of Israel, until October 30th, 1991, with this man, George Bush Sr. Now, when I get into this, I'm apolitical. I am not Republican or Democrat. I'm not against black or white or anything like that, because God follows his word. And because someone is politically Republican, if they violate his word, it doesn't matter to the Lord.
Right.
So I want you to follow that as we go on, right?